Welcome to Alberta Weekly. I'm Jeannette Rocher. 2022 has been an interesting year. There's been a regime change in Alberta, party elections, angry words, lots of Twitter posts, and hurt feelings. So to talk more about the news and politics of the year in Alberta, we've assembled a trifecta of learned and opinionated Albertans. Joining us today from the Western Standard is both editor Dave Naylor and political analyst Nigel Hannaford, who was Stephen Harper's former speechwriter. And we also have independent MLA Drew Barnes from Medicine Hat. Gentlemen, welcome to our panel. Great to have you all here today.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Never been called before.
Okay, so much has happened this year. It's hard to know where to start. So Dave Naylor, why don't we start with you? Can you give us your top news headlines from 2022?
Well, if it was a Time magazine cover, I think, Jeannette, it would be Danielle Smith, Woman of the Year. This is a woman who in just a matter of weeks went from deciding to get back into politics and run as a local MLA to saying, hey, if the top job became open, I may take a run at it, to in fact taking a run at it and winning and becoming Alberta Premier, all in the matter of a few months. So an astonishing rise to power. So she would get my vote for the newsmaker of 2022.
Wow. Okay. So MLA Drew Barnes, what about you? What stood out most to you this year?
Well, I would pick the convoys, the Freedom Convoy, Tamara Leach, and the brave truckers, the people that stepped up and led such a strong, peaceful, and legal protest. Of course, right here in Alberta at home, Coots. I went down to Coots one afternoon, and what a family party atmosphere. Everywhere you went, it was, hey, come for a hot dog, come for a hot chocolate, here's a brownie. So to me, that was the instigator. Certainly, Dave has a point with Premier Smith, her incredible political comeback. But without the Freedom Convoy, without the people that stepped up to fight for our freedoms, and without Jason Kenney so badly not meeting expectations, she wouldn't have had that opportunity.
Okay, yeah, we're definitely going to get into the Freedom Convoy and the Coots border blockade later on in the segment. But Nigel Hannaford, when you look back at 2022, what do you take away from this past year?
Well, I think certainly, Jeannette, that both of those are worthy placements for best story of the year, most important event. You have to put them together also with the elevation of Pierre Polieve to leader of the opposition. I think that there's a common theme here, that people are restless, and they are expressing that through politicians who they perceive to be authentic, who are listening to them. And the significance of the convoy also is that people are ready to let the federal government know that they can't assume they can do whatever they like. So there's a mood in the country, and it's perhaps the mood that is the story.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we of course definitely need to stir things up a little bit and talk about the Sovereignty Act. And of course, you were also mentioning Danielle Smith. So cutting all the talking points clutter aside, Drew Barnes, let's start with you. What's your take on this piece of legislation? Does it get a passing grade from the people in your riding of Medicine Hat?
Oh, well, it would get a B or a C only. Cypress Medicine Hatters so much want to step up, fight for their freedom, demand economic freedom and personal freedom again from their governments, particularly Ottawa. The Sovereignty Act, though, two things. It's a bit misguided. To keep Ottawa in its jurisdiction, there's other ways to challenge them for that. Secondly, I think the Smith government missed a chance to amend the law to where it could be more transparent, more in the open of the legislature. Anytime they direct a provincial entity like a municipality or a bank like ATB, that should be in the full light of the legislature where everyone can see. Cypress Medicine Hatters realize that the only way that we're going to get more autonomy and more fairness from Ottawa is if we do the things that count. And those are our own police force, collect our own taxes, have our own pension plan, more control over our immigration. And we so want to stay in Canada, but we so want a fair deal for our families and communities. And that might mean an independence referendum someday.
Okay, we do need to take a quick break, but we will get right back to this question as soon as we return. We'll talk more about Alberta's Sovereignty Act in a united Canada. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our panel, continuing to talk about the Sovereignty Act inside a united Canada. Dave Naylor from the Western Standard, you get your word in on this one here since we missed it before the break. So when you investigate the details of the act, do you think that this will be useful to Albertans?
Well, I don't think it can hurt, right? I mean, I think Albertans only want what people in Quebec have had for decades, and nobody seems upset when it happens in Quebec. But as soon as Alberta raises it, the Laurentian elites go bananas. When I'm in my local pub, it's really not on the number one on the list, but it's certainly going to be a very handy tool for Premier Smith to have in her toolbox. And when we had Jason Kenney, we were promised to fight with Ottawa, and we never got it. And Danielle Smith was elected saying she was going to fight. So at least we're starting to see a little bit of movement on that front, Jeanette.
Nigel, when you look at all the media and political he said, she said going around, what's your take on the Sovereignty Act?
Well, I'm all for it. I think that you have to have a reasoned and a mechanism to push back against Ottawa. She uses the phrase when Ottawa gets out of its lane, and it's a very useful lane. Anybody who's ever been sideswiped on the highway knows what that means. And there is a real sense that Ottawa is trying to command and control areas that are strongly provincial jurisdiction, most significantly with respect to the energy industry, but latterly we've heard federal ambitions to control even how much fertilizer the farmers put on their fields. These are things where the province needs to be the defender of the people of the province. And if it takes a Sovereignty Act to actually get everybody pointed in the same direction, so be it. Use the Constitution to demand the rights that the provinces were given in 1867.
So it appears that the NDP are looking for any advantage and the opportunity to bring their socialist style of policies and politics to Alberta. So Dave, would this be something Albertans can afford? And what's your honest take on round two for Alberta with Rachel Notley as our premier?
Well, it's a lot has to happen before that, Jeanette. I mean, the current polls have the UCP back out in front, but it is neck and neck. I think the next few months are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch, because I think you've really got two leaders that really don't like each other, and the NDP is already in election mode. They've got press releases coming out on a daily basis. They've got press releases coming out after every UCP release, and the UCP is trying to take away as much of their breathing room as they can by handing out millions and millions of dollars to various groups that need it, and food bank and stuff like that. But I can't wait for the writ to drop. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, well, I mean, today's point, I mean, you would certainly expect any opposition party to do exactly what the NDP is doing if they are well funded and have plenty of supporters, stakeholders as they would call them, who can join in the chorus. But I think what Premier Smith has done so far, and we'll have to see how it works out, but she has very much tied her fortunes to making improvements that ordinary people who don't really, they care about the Sovereignty Act, but in the end, they care more about whether they can get themselves into hospital or somebody they care about into hospital. They care about crime on the subways and crime on the street. the homeless difficulties, and Smith seems to be taking those on. Now, it's going to see, her fortune is going to depend on whether she can do what she says she is going to do. She has said publicly within the last week that there are 69,000 people waiting for surgeries in Alberta right now. If that number is way down in May of next year, I would say she has a good case to go to the voters and say, reward me for that. If not, well, I have to see what happens. But she's putting her emphasis on the things that matter to ordinary people, even though there's been a lot of talk about fairly elevated political theories.
Okay, we do need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll certainly return to this subject as well as talking about healthcare and education. Welcome back to our panel here on Alberta Weekly. During the last segment, we got to hear from Drew from Dave rather, and from Nigel. We would like to have Drew Barnes weigh in now. Drew, have you obviously have an important view of the political landscape. So are Albertans winning or losing right now with how the UCP has been operating? And of course, we were talking a little bit about Rachel Notley versus Danielle in the upcoming election.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Albertans are winning because there's choice out there, and Albertans are going to win in even further. Dave Naylor's point about the competitiveness between Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith, I believe is true and is there. Do we read anything into the fact that Premier Smith didn't show up when it was time to unveil past Premier Notley's portrait? I mean, that's maybe an indicator. But the two parties are virtually tied in the polls. We haven't seen that since Ralph Klein ran against Lawrence Decore in the early 90s when Alberta was in debt, Premier Getty had overspent, and it was time for real change, and Albertans stepped up. So we're in an election that could maybe come out tied. So I look at some of these third parties that have been out there and have floundered. If somebody can maybe fill a void there might be an opportunity for more ideas to be presented for Albertans, and maybe even the balance of power to be gained. When I talk to Cypress Medicine Hatters about Premier Smith so far, to be frank, they're a little disappointed. There's still a lot of positivity and hope that she'll meet her expectations in her promises, but they feel that she did water the Sovereignty Act down a bit. They feel that her backing away on the Human Rights Act protection for vaccination status, the fact that she abandoned that, is a cause for concern. And Jeannette, a lot of Cypress Medicine Hatters and Albertans are really hoping for tax cuts. They know that anytime the government puts this money out, it's just inflationary. And, of course, there's no free lunches. The government wrote all kinds of checks during COVID, and now interest rates have quadrupled, and we're paying the price for that. So here we have governments doing it again. Manitoba and Saskatchewan have already eliminated their 2% small business tax. What we should do in Alberta is raise our personal exemption so no Albertan starts paying tax to past $25,000 income. We should get back to our 10% flat tax. We're blessed with $28 billion this year in oil and gas royalties. Let's put that money directly, or as much as we can, into Albertans' pockets. And I believe if Premier Smith would do that, like Ron DeSantis in Florida, she'd be rewarded by the voters.
Okay, all right. So moving along here, education and healthcare, two massive expenditures for the province. Some want to spend and manage a larger workforce in these two sectors. So others feel that we can't keep doing the same things and expect different results. So they obviously want to see some change. So Nigel, what would your opinion be if Alberta instituted a voucher system for healthcare and education? This has obviously been a topic of discussion for years.
I think that would be a huge step forward for a lot of people. One of the problems with, let's take healthcare before we take education. One of the problems with healthcare is that when you show up at a hospital, you are a cost because the hospitals are funded according to a per capita ratio. So if there's 1 million people, you get 1 million times what is the amount, and you've got to work with that. So when somebody comes to your door, they represent a cost, but not a revenue source. Give that same person a voucher, and they can go to this hospital or that hospital. You have a very different reception at the front door. That's Put it very simply, that's kind of what a voucher system allows you to do.
Dave Naylor, where are you on this issue? What would be the best case scenario on education, or maybe how Smith and the UCP can keep these two systems afloat?
Well, I think Premier Smith has hitched her electoral wagon to the healthcare system, and that's what needs fixing. And, let's face it, it's not just Alberta. Healthcare is in a crisis across the country. The feds and the provinces just can't get together, it seems, on spending more money. So we've got to look at different ways of funding the healthcare system. We've got to get the waiting list down, as Nigel says. We've got to get, if I take somebody into the emergency room, I don't want to sit there for 16 hours till I'm treated. If Premier Smith can take some small steps in tackling that and maybe finding different ways to tackling that, then I think she's got a chance for re-election. If the healthcare system is the same mess as it is now, come May, I think that may give Premier Notley Part 2 an in.
Okay, we do need to take a quick break, but when we return, we will get to Drew on this. So give him the last word on this. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to our Alberta panel, Alberta Weekly panel here. So we ended up talking about a voucher system for healthcare and education. Drew, we're going to give you the last word on this one, so we know that you're for freedom of choice. So can you give us your insight on why a voucher system for healthcare and education may or may not be the best policy going forward?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, Albertans know healthcare is too expensive. We're 26 billion a year we're spending now. It is so broken, ambulance times and wait times, and we have slipped so much in our education system. I mean, I heard the story the other day about a surgeon and a patient that flew out from Calgary to BC to use the operating room together because according to the Canadian Health Act, ridiculously, you can't do that. You couldn't operate in Calgary. It's just craziness. Three things we got to do first, though. We have to train a whole bunch more Alberta kids to be doctors and nurse practitioners. We need to fill that hole. Secondly, we need a proper IT system, a computer system, so we can track what's costing us now in the system, where our superior outcomes to our inferior outcomes, so we can start to work and put those things together. And third, the patient has to be a little more conscious of what the system costs. I think every time you use a healthcare service in Alberta, you should sign a bill, not pay for it, but you should sign a bill so you know what it costs. Publicly funded, let's start to put some accountability in it. And then as Nigel and Dave said, then let's start to give patients as much choice as we can, publicly funded.
Since the start of 2022, the Canadian protests and freedom rallies were something not seen before in Canada. So Freedom Corp, the group representing the leaders of the Freedom Rally in Ottawa, claimed that the Government of Canada planned a false narrative against protesters before the protesters even got to Ottawa. So Nigel, did you have an opportunity to visit any of the protest sites, and were these protests effective in your opinion?
Sadly, I didn't go to any of the sites. I say sadly, as a former trucker, I felt I ought to have been there, but circumstances didn't work that way for me. With respect to whether they were effective or not, yes, absolutely they were effective. It caused the federal government to just stop and say, maybe we can't just push people around. And we've had this inquiry since then where so much has been exposed that was devious, manipulative, and places the Liberal government in a very poor light. I think people have finally seen through what the game plan is, and I totally credit the trucker movement for that.
Okay. Drew Barnes, I believe that you visited the Coutts border during this time. What did you see when you were there, and what was your opinion of the situation?
Oh, thank you. What a family atmosphere. There must have been 10,000 people there. Everything was peaceful and pleasant, and everybody was having a good time. Everywhere I went, people were calling, "Hey, come have a hot dog. We got a hot chocolate for you." It was really peaceful and good and effective. Scott Moe realized instantly when the Coutts border happened in Ottawa that if he didn't release some of the mandates, that he was going to have convoys all throughout Saskatchewan. So Scott Moe was the first one to react. And look at the difference. Premier Moe removed some mandates. Jason Kenney phoned for military help. Scott Moe won re-election, and Premier Kenney's on to a new career.
And Dave Naylor, we had a wide breadth of opinions from across the country on these protesting events. So what did you think of the protests at these locations?
Well, I think they were very effective. And I think, as Nigel's talked about, the public inquiry has just shown what a sham it was for the Emergencies Act to even be brought in. The Minister of Lies, Mendocino, it was 13, 14 times. He said in the House that police had asked him or demanded from him the Emergencies Act, and he was shown that no, that was not the truth. Courts across the country have been dropping charges for people that, from pastors to, people taking parts in, weekend rallies in various cities. So, yes, the effect has been huge. And, they're already talking about doing it again in February, Jeannette. So that's something to keep an eye on early next year.
Wow, absolutely. And gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, we could go on and on, but we thank you for being here, for sharing your views and your expertise with our viewers. And we're sure that 2023 could be a battle like no other. What side will the people of Alberta choose? Well, that will be up to you, our viewers, to decide. The outcome of 2023 is up to you. For all of us here at Bridge City News and Alberta Weekly, I'm Jeannette Rocher. Thanks so much for watching.